Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, debt slaves, hearse, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. Welcome, I'm a useful idiot, and I want to talk about Syria. And this is interesting for me because back during the Obama administration, there was so much going on in Syria, and it was in the news every day about this horrific civil war there that I probably did 50 or 60 videos on Syria back during the Obama administration. And it was just a clusterfuck of epic proportions. And now I can safely say I think this is the biggest geopolitical clusterfuck of the 21st century so far. It's astounding to see these events unfold and then everything else that's going on in Syria right now. But I want to back up a little bit. I want to start off by talking about Wesley Clark revealing that after 9/11, the U.S. created a list of countries and regimes that they were going to topple. And this list included Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and eventually Iran. And it's taken over 20 years to do it, but the U.S. has succeeded, albeit in a strange way. And so now like Iraq and in Libya, which have been completely obliterated, one of the last secular governments in the region is now in the hands of jihadists. And as I mentioned in this list that Wesley Clark revealed in 2007, one by one, those countries are all going down as promised. And now this is the jewel in the crown for the U.S. empire. And one of the things that's interesting is the timing, of course. It's seemingly been quiet, but one of the things that's interesting about this story is that this story in Syria has been going on for 14 years, and it was in all the headlines for a long time under the Obama administration. It got strangely quiet over the last 15 years or so, or 10 years, and that doesn't mean that a lot of things still haven't been going on, and that's one of the things, like I say, that makes this a total clusterfuck, because we've had all kinds of players involved in this situation in Syria, and it makes it really hard to understand the labyrinth of players and all the activities that are going on, because we have the Kurds, of course, involved there, we have Turkey involved there, we have Israel involved there, we have Iran involved there, we have Iraq involved there, and we have Russia and the U.S. all involved there. And right now, it's a free-for-all for all the players that are involved there. And I want to back up a little bit more, too, because this whole time we were demonizing Assad in Syria. And once again, using that time-honored technique of saying he was like Hitler and gassed his own people in this terrible civil war there. But the fact is that in post 9/11, the CIA used Syrian prisons because they knew they were horrible, and used those to do extraordinary rendition, to send people that they captured there to get the shit tortured out of them. And so it's not like the U.S. didn't know what kind of government was going on in Syria, but as usual, the U.S. will get in bed with anybody to perpetrate their policies. And we're seeing that full blown now, because now we have this HTS organization, which used to have some affiliations with ISIS and Al Qaeda. And supposedly, the leader of HTS turned his back on ISIS and also turned his back on Al Qaeda years ago, and has actually had clashes with them. But the fact is, they're still a jihadist group. Up until recently, or actually, they're still listed as a terrorist organization by the international community, including the U.S. And ironically, the leader of HTS has a $10 million bounty on his head by the U.S., and yet now he is the leader of Syria, and Biden has promised to give him aid to support Syria in their transition to this new government. So how ironic, the guy that's leading the Syria now still de facto has a $10 million bounty on his head by the United States, but now we're welcoming him as the new leader of Syria. And I'm also having a big case of deja vu because we're seeing that same playbook we saw in the fall of Iraq in Syria. We see the statue of Assad being torn down by the crowds and the head being passed around. We're seeing the palaces looted, and we're also seeing all the prisons emptied and all the horrors of these prisons exposed. So very, very eerie deja vu compared to Iraq. And of course, the big picture of this, of course, you go back during the Obama administration, and he promised no boots in the ground, that we wouldn't be directly involved in Syria. And now here we are all the years later. Not only is there boots on the ground, we have 900 U.S. troops that control a third of the territory and have for many years extracting oil in Syria. So you really can't make this stuff up. And now we have a free-for-all going on, and that's what I mean by a clusterfuck, because everybody's serving their interests right now. So we've had all these Turkish corridors in the northern part of Syria that Turkey has used to fight Kurdish elements there. And Kurdish elements, of course, have been involved in the opposition against the Assad government. They're labeled terrorists by Turkey, but the U.S. has used them, facilitated them for opposition against Assad. And the same thing goes with Al-Qaeda, just like the U.S. did in Libya. The U.S., even though Al-Qaeda is supposedly our mortal enemy and was behind 9/11, the U.S. has armed and trained Al-Qaeda elements, including what is now the HTS that controls Syria, to perpetrate our ultimate goal in the U.S., the toppling of the Assad government. And so it's also interesting that we have, even though the HTS claims it has no connections with ISIS or Al-Qaeda anymore, that is their roots, and they are jihadists. And now they run the government of Syria, and the U.S. is going to embrace them. So once again, like I say, you can't make this stuff up. So what's going to happen with those 900 U.S. troops in Syria? We know that Russian troops are on their way out. We know that Iranian troops are on their way out. And supposedly the HTS government now is going to supposedly cozy up to the U.S. and Israel and want to expel Iran, want to expel Russia, and the supply lines from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah are now cut. And so a lot of the timing of this makes sense because, of course, Russia is bogged down in Ukraine and Iran has its hands full with these confrontations with Israel. And so I suspect that this whole time the U.S. and Israel and Turkey have been orchestrating this final thrust. And in fact, military experts have said it would have merely taken a brigade or a battalion of Iranian or Russian troops could have possibly stopped the success of this sudden toppling of the Assad government. And supposedly the new HTS government in Syria is no friend of Hezbollah either. So a lot of this is very strange and to me speaks of a lot of U.S., Israeli, and Turkish involvement. And there's talk as well that one of the reasons this final assault happened so fast is because the Turkish government, the U.S. and Israel have been using a lot of bribery to make sure that Syrian troops stood down. There's also a lot of reports that morale and support of the Assad government and the military has been wavering for years, so that could be a component of it as well. But it's just such a labyrinth. It's really hard to sort through all this. But even more surreal, of course, is what's going on now. So the HTS government is in control of Syria, has taken over the capital, and Assad has fled to Russia. And the HTS government has pledged that it wants to have a new relationship with Israel, have a new relationship with Turkey, and have a new relationship with the United States. But at the same time, what's going on now is Israel has pushed its forces out of the Golan Heights into Syrian territory for a so-called buffer zone. And we'll see if they ever leave. And then Israel has had massive airstrikes in the last few days, trying to blow up all the military assets so they don't fall into the hands of the HTS government. And they're basically breaking a 50-year peace deal with Syria by doing so. And then we have the United States also doing massive bombing and airstrikes all over Syria, going after ISIS targets and weapons depots. And so pretty interesting. So on the one hand, HTS and the U.S. and Israel are talking about a new relationship with Syria, but here we are in the last few days, and Turkey and the U.S. and Israel are bombing the shit out of everything they can find in Syria because they already don't trust this new government. And what's going to happen next is really hard to say. On the face of it, of course, we have this new jihadist but supposedly somewhat neutral government taking control in Syria. They're promising to continue to hold government positions in place for now, and they're promising to have elections. And something just doesn't smell right about all this. And certainly the United States and Turkish and Israeli militaries are hedging their bets by destroying everything they can from falling into the arms of this new government. But I really, at this point, I have no way to predict what's going to happen in Syria moving forward. I know Syrians around the world are cheering the fall of this 53-year Assad dynasty finally ending. Definitely an oppressive government. There's no question about that. But there's also a question of what's going to happen now. We have, I think, something like 10 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. I would imagine Turkey's going to try and push them out of Turkish territory as soon as possible. So we're going to have an influx of 10 million Syrian refugees coming back into the country. And for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's going to continue to be a clusterfuck moving forward. So all bets are off. But the big picture is we have a jihadist government in control in Syria. The United States reached its goal of toppling the Assad regime, been on their list for 20 years, and the entire fabric of the Middle East and its dynamics have changed drastically, and it'll be interesting and fascinating to watch what happens moving forward, and pretty much anything could happen. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?